a great, wonderful moment where the streams of our thought from this morning come together. So this morning we had deep reflection on the origins and the current developments in the economy of communion. And we had our appetizers for what the kind of work that we would like to do also in the other disciplines. We had a wonderful smorgasbord set out. And then we had the real lunch, which was a wonderful chance to be together and to talk more about the ideas. And so for this session, we are inviting Elizabeth Garlow, who is a longtime champion and leader in the North American Economy of Communion Association gatherings, spearheading our efforts to come together for reflection, not only on the project, but also on what it means for our intellectual life, our cultural dialogue. And so she will introduce our speakers and moderate this next session. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon, everyone. We live in a pretty fascinating time. It's a time that's full of a lot of complexity. And I've heard some call us the sandwich generation. We're a generation between what was and what is yet to be. We are in the middle, or as some might call the liminal space, and it can feel a little messy. It can feel a little confusing, but it's also a gift and an opportunity to collectively discern and live into the values that most deeply animate us, and to tend to the painful divisions or the wounds of the moment and find our way forward together. The complexity of the moment, I believe, is part of what brings us into conversation today. Our dominant frameworks for understanding how to approach and wrestle with some of these tough questions just don't suffice. They're rather simplistic, they're rather dualistic. The old tired debates of capitalist versus socialist, of liberal versus conservative, do little to offer us space for real dialogue and authentic encounter with one another, finding our way forward together, building new paradigms for the future. Meanwhile, mounting concerns about severe levels of social inequality and environmental degradation have sparked unrest throughout the globe. In the words of the teenage activist Greta Thunberg, humanity is now standing at a crossroads. We must now decide which path we want to take. What might it take for humanity to decide for the path towards sustainable living? Who and what can help us to envision and embark on the path that will lead us to a future of human flourishing? And how might we gather the resources we need for the journey? One person with tremendous global influence and convening power, who is perhaps helping to point the way, is Pope Francis. Through his life and his thought leadership, Pope Francis has invited us to reflect on what it means to truly foster a culture of encounter and of life in today's world. Pope Francis insists that an economy of exclusion is an economy that kills. In just a couple of months, Pope Francis is using his global convening power to invite the next generation of economists, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to explore together, quote, a different kind of economy, one that brings life, not death, one that is inclusive and not exclusive, humane and not dehumanizing, one that cares for the environment and does not despoil it. The Pope acknowledges that it is not easy to get this message across. Sadly, the Pope notes, until now, few have heard the appeal to acknowledge the gravity of the problems and even more to set in place a new economic model that is the fruit of a culture of communion based on fraternity and equality. So he too banks on the next generation's capacity to generate a captivating vision and commitment. An important step in this journey will be the March 2020 Economy of Francesco event in Assisi, Italy. As the Pope explains, it will be an occasion to come together to, quote, enter into a covenant to change today's economy and give a soul to the economy of tomorrow. The aim of the meeting is, together with the next generation, to, quote, appeal to some of our best economists and entrepreneurs who are already working on the global level to create an economy that is consistent with these ideals. As participants have explored this morning, we are on the cusp of exploring and crafting economic models that do, as Pope Francis has previously called for, change the rules of the system, going beyond philanthropy to foster real communion. One recognized project in this domain is the Economy of Communion, an initiative of the Focolare movement and one of the organizing entities for the March 2020 Assisi gathering. As the Economy of Communion has developed over the years, it now includes not only businesses, but also an incubator for new entrepreneurs, projects focused on sustainability and social impact, systems to welcome and integrate migrants, and professional training centers for workers. It is a prophetic economy, as many have called it. According to the most recent Economy of Communion report, 1.6 million euros were collected through businesses in the initiative and distributed to fund various developmental and educational projects throughout the globe. A part of those funds were also allocated to foster a culture of giving and educate others in a new way of doing business. Pope Francis has been explicit in his reflections on the Economy of Communion's meaning and potential. On the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the project, he delivered a lengthy address to the audience of the Economy of Communion business owners, scholars, and others, which will be discussed at length in this panel. And in recent months, the Economy of Communion has partnered with a number of organizations across the US and Canada to reflect on the Pope's call for a moral economy and his invitation to Assisi. That conversation is drawing together hundreds of entrepreneurs, theologians, ministers, academics, students, and many others eager to cross-pollinate and reflect together. And so now I have the distinct pleasure of inviting Jesus Moran, who many of you have already gotten to know this morning, a Spanish philosopher and theologian and co-president of the Focolare, who will share his reflection on Pope Francis and the Economy of Communion. And I also want to note that the larger article that is inspiring his remarks will be available outside, as will one of his books for you Spanish speakers in the audience. Just want to point out some of those resources if you want to continue to build upon Jesus' remarks. So we will invite Jesus to come now.
Test.
Scusate che sono di nuovo qua. Sta arrivando.
People are still coming.
Testing? Yeah, my dad says it works better if you turn it on, right? So he said, I'm sorry that I'm here again.
Right.
Però vi prometto che sarà l'ultima volta.
But for sure it'll be the last time of a formal talk like this.
Intanto non sono abituato a parlare alle 2 del pomeriggio.
And first of all, I'm not used to talking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Credo che sia la prima volta pure questa.
It's the very first time that I talk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Perché noi spagnoli a quest'ora
We Spanish people at this hour,
dopo c'è la siesta
there's the siesta.
e dopo torniamo a essere persone.
And then we become people again.
E le persone ragionano, no?
People who are able to reason.
Quindi adesso non vi assicuro che questi pensieri siano molto ragionevoli.
So I'm not sure that it's very reasonable what I'm about to say.
Va bene, abbiamo parlato anche adesso a pranzo molto dell'immigrazione.
So we talked a lot during lunch about immigration.
E anche di questa prima cosa che dirò che avete nel testo.
And the first thing that is noted here in the text.
Che tutti ci rendiamo conto degli ostacoli formidabili, no, che bloccano una più accoglienza della sfida lanciata da Papa
I
Francesco.
realize that formidable obstacles stand in the way of broader reception of the challenge launched by Pope Francis.
Adesso già potete seguire, no? Ecco, è uno dei più grandi
One of the most difficult is the currently intense levels of social, political, and ecclesial polarization, which also foster a tendency to interpret his proposals through a divisive ideological lens. To get beyond this, we need interpretive keys to help us understand with depth the core themes of his papacy. Into this gap steps the thorough and thoughtful work of Massimo Borghese, one of Bergoglio's intellectual biography, Mind of the Pope of Francis. A core theme of this work is understanding the pivotal conceptual role that the unity of opposites plays in his intellectual framework. He writes, Bergoglio fought for a synthesis of the oppositions that lacerated the historical reality, proposing an antinomian unity, an agonic solution achieved by the way of contrast.
Papa Francesco, the contrast is not negative. It's negative la contraposizione.
What is negative is
but not the contrast.
Not contrast, but conflict, right?
Sì.
Yeah. Opposition.
Sì, opposition. It's a very, very important difference. In an
interview with the Italian Jesuit journalist Antonio Spadaro, Pope Francis explained how the work of Romano Guardini helped shape his thought in this regard. He says, Guardini spoke of a polar opposition in which the two opposites are not annulled. One pole does not destroy the other. There is no contradiction and no identity. For him, opposition is resolved at a higher level. The tension remains, it is not canceled out. The limits are overcome, not negated. Oppositions are helpful. Human life is structured in an oppositional form.
Ci sono alcune opposizioni polari che sono essenziali per la fecondità della vita.
There's a few kinds of oppositions that are essential for the fruitfulness of human life.
Romano Guardini enumera alcune, no?
And Guardini talks about several of them.
Per esempio l'opposizione uomo-donna.
The contrast between men and women.
Questa è un'opposizione polare.
It's a polar opposition.
Un polo esige l'altro.
That also demands that they need one another.
E solo così avviene la vita.
And this is how life also emerges.
Ma ci sarebbero tantissime altre opposizioni polari.
But there would be many other kinds of polar oppositions.
Dove c'è un contrasto.
Where there's a contrast.
Quindi una possibilità di conflitto.
And then the possibility of a conflict.
Che bisogna assumere.
That we need to take on.
Però che non sono negative.
But it's not a negative thing.
Anche Nord-Sud.
The North-South tension.
Culturalmente parlando.
Speaking culturally.
O Est-Ovest.
East-West.
Sono tutte opposizioni polari.
These are all polar oppositions.
Anziani e giovani.
Young and old, elderly.
How does this form of thought manifest in the work of Pope Francis? Borghese writes, Ecclesial unity is not to be understood as a monolithic block in which unity comes down from on high in a fixed and direct manner. It is not afraid of accommodating different poles and reconciling them in the Spirit who unites everything as in a musical symphony. This communio is realized in a dialogical form, in the patient development of interconnections that does not present to negate the accents, the variety of approaches that remain.
Le sensibilità diverse che permangono. Without diversity, there isn't unity. E questo è fondamentale, no?
And this is very important.
Questo potrebbe aiutarci a passare dalla polarizzazione come rottura a modalità di interpretazione multiformi.
What models of thought might help us to move from a polarizing rupture to a more multifaceted modes of interpretation? In Evangelii Gaudium,
The model is more fixed and more rigid.
Il modello poliedrico è più dinamico.
The polyhedric model is dynamic.
right, Pope Francis
Dicono il testo,
contrasts the
la
spherical
sfera
model with a more dynamic polyhedron. The sphere is no greater than its parts, where every point is equidistant from the center, and there are no differences between them. In contrast, the polyhedron reflects the convergence of all its parts, each of which preserves its distinctiveness. In this model, that's the polyhedric one, guidance does not emanate from the center according to equidistant and uniform relationships, because such model risks losing not only its own uniqueness, but also the particular gift or talent that could be put at the service of the whole. The economy of communion as the unity of opposites in action. It's interesting to note the parallels between Bergoglio's intellectual formation and one of the insights at the heart of Focolare founder Chiara Lubich. As the Focolare Interdisciplinary Studies Center was developing in the late 1990s, Lubich explained that the synthesis at the heart of the doctrine that was emerging. She says, because the ideal of unity brings about the unity of opposites. Initial steps within the study center itself included work to reconcile tensions between different current and schools of thought within theology. As Lubich challenged, the project is to bring about a synthesis and not a compromise. Thus,
In this, we can't take shortcuts.
non risultano.
The shortcuts don't turn out well.
Quindi bisogna arrivare alla sintesi.
We need to arrive to a work of synthesis.
Altrimenti è meglio non cominciare nemmeno il lavoro.
Otherwise, it's not even worth it to start the work.
Quindi non
thus it is
sorprende
not
che
surprising that Pope Francis, in his own commentary on the Focolare's economic project, would highlight the oxymoronic challenge that its name embodies. Pope Francis says, economy and communion. These are two words that contemporary culture keeps separate and often considers opposites. Two words that you would have instead joined, accepting the invitation that Chiara Lubich offered you 25 years ago in Brazil, when in the face of the scandal of inequality in the city of São Paulo, she asked entrepreneurs to become agents of communion. With your life, you demonstrate that economy and communion become more beautiful when they are beside each other. What happens when the characteristics of the economy of communion are mapped onto the tensions inherent in the social and economic development? She talks about protagonists of development, El Pueblo Fiel, and the EOC. First, let's look at the protagonists of social and economic development. Whose voices and perspectives should be taken into consideration when working to develop viable models of economic development? Reflecting on this tension, what comes into relief is the popular origins of the economy of communion. The idea did not emerge from the mind of an academic at a conference or in the office of a Washington think tank. It emerged in response to a vital community-based contact with the poor, who themselves were an integral part of Focolare communities in Brazil.
So the point of departure was very real and not abstract.
With these tensions in mind, it is interesting to consider the economy of communion in light of Pope Francis's reflections on El Pueblo Fiel, the faithful people. As Borghese explains, El Pueblo Fiel is distinctly separate from both the populist ideologies of the Marxist system, which is fixed to the abstract categories of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Instead, The concept of the believing people refers to him to the historical ways that faith animates life, reality, culture. It points to the how of the incarnation. It is not a question of academic sociology, but of the historical, lived terrain that nourishes the faith of the Church. In sum, popular spirituality is culture, an organic web that links together all aspects of existence. That's Pope Francis. All of these elements come together in the 2007 document which followed the Latin American Bishops' Conference meeting in Aparecida, Brazil, on which Bergoglio had a very strong influence. As
he was the principal drafter of the document for Aparecida.
As Borghese notes, the pueblo fiel, the poor, the witnesses, the ecclesial communities become theological places where the face of Christ manifests itself today. It is the face of the humiliated Christ, the Samaritan, the crucified one, the one who surprises and attracts by his mercy, his embrace, his singular humanity. Aparecida valued everything. There would be numerous ways to illustrate how the Economy of Communion project emerged and continues to develop with the dynamic creativity of El Pueblo Fiel. For example, the life of El Pueblo Fiel is also evident in the stories of the entrepreneurs share about how they see the providential intervention of God in the midst of their effort to run their businesses according to Economy of Communion principles. Who are the protagonists of development? Does guidance for the direction of a business or development project flow from top-down experts, or does it emerge from grassroots insights? Within the varieties of EOC experience, the answer is not only both and not just a synthesis. By placing a priority on relationships of communion, and by opening themselves to divine intervention, the protagonist becomes, in a certain sense, the life of communion itself. Next heading, interest and tension beyond altruism. A second tension in development work is the struggle to articulate shared interests. Stated in the broadest terms, it is difficult to imagine and articulate how the interests of people with social and legal control over material resources might fully align with the interests of those who lack the material resources needed for social and economic development. It is not that people with resources are not engaged in shifting the balance, but that this shift is perceived as requiring them to pull against their own interests and to sacrifice something valuable.
It's as if these economic changes
avesse bisogno di come dei martiri, dei superuomini
would need kind of super people or martyrs of some kind,
o di persone con una forza di volontà
or
straordinaria.
people with an incredible will.
Vedremo che non è esattamente così.
But it's not like this.
Allora questo ci permette di superare
So this helps us to get
la
beyond the
tensione
tension
tra interessi personali
between personal
e
interests
comunione,
and the life of communion,
perché anche questa è un'opposizione polare.
because this is also another polar opposite.
L'economista italiano Luigino Bruni
The Italian economist Luigino Bruni, whose groundbreaking work has provided theoretical foundations for the Economy of Communion project, highlights the historical contribution of economic theorists less tainted by the polarities of individualism. As Bruni summarizes in the work of Antonio Genovese, the love of self and love of others are two dimensions that are both present in the person, and the dynamics of human action are explainable on the basis of the interplay between these two basic forces. This, in turn, provides a foundation for interests to align.
Mi dicono che questo è fondamentale in questa cultura,
And this is especially important in this culture,
nella cultura americana.
in the US culture.
Altrimenti si è bloccati, no?
Otherwise, there's really a block.
Ma io ho visitato poco fa alcuni paesi ex comunisti
I mentioned the countries that used to be under the communist regime
dell'Europa orientale
from Eastern Europe,
e il problema è anche questo,
and this is also the same problem,
solo che dall'altra parte,
but from the other point of view.
dall'altra parte. Un profondo supporto
Profound theological support for the alignment of interests is also evident in Pope Benedict's reflections on the relational dynamic at the heart of the Trinity in Caritas in Veritate. He says, God desires to incorporate us into this reality of communion as well, that they may be one even as we are one. In this light, we understand that true openness does not mean loss of individual identity, but profound interpenetration. With strong conceptual grounding in this anthropological vision, the Economy of Communion project offers a laboratory for reconceptualizing shared interests. For Focolare founder Chiara Lubich, the hermeneutical key to what she termed the culture of giving was to discover all the ways in which these everyday acts of openness to others were not in the order of a heroic pull against one's own interests. Chiara writes, unlike the consumer economy based on a culture of having, the economy of communion is the economy of giving. This could seem difficult, arduous, heroic, but it is not, because the human person, made in the image of God who is love, finds fulfillment precisely in loving, in giving. This need to love lies in the deepest core of our being, whether we are believers or not.
Quindi il dare è nella natura dell'uomo, è il modo migliore per realizzarsi personalmente.
So giving is in the very heart of what it means to be a person.
Qui c'è tutto un cambio di mentalità.
There's a complete change of mentality in this.
When the culture of giving or of communion is lived in all of its power and depth, participants in these projects break through the tension at the heart of zero-sum games theories or altruism in which service to others is pitted against one's own interests. Instead, through a Trinitarian lens, it calls for sacrifice or generosity make little sense if a sharing of material goods is simply an expression of one's own identity as a member of the universal human family. To paraphrase Lubich, service to others may seem arduous and heroic, but it is not so, because such a stance is precisely what leads to personal fulfillment as well. In his own reflections on what the charism of unity has to offer the Church and the world, Pope Francis summarized the dynamic with the catchphrase, the spirituality of the we. Pope Francis writes, the charism of unity is a providential stimulus and a powerful support for experiencing this evangelical mysticism of the we, that is, walking together in the history of the men and women of our time as of one heart and soul, see Acts 4:32, discovering and loving concretely those members of one another. Jesus prayed to the Father for this, that we may be one as you and I are one. And in himself he showed us the way up to the complete gift of all in the abyssal emptying of the cross. This is the spirituality of the we. It is very important to note that this we is not a uniform agglomeration without identity, or a flattening collective of merely sociological nature. Instead, it is a better understood as the result of the concrete practice of the Pauline motto, "You are one in Christ Jesus." This is perhaps best expressed with a more literal translation from the Greek, "You are one person in Christ Jesus." The "we" in this sense ultimately points to the experience of the Trinitarian God in human flesh. To recognize and work creatively to address the needs of others is not so much a matter of reaching beyond my own interests, but the logical consequences of an ontological claim about what it means to be human. That is, to acknowledge how my own identity is grounded in my fundamental connection to other human beings and their needs. Next heading, Prophetic Economy, Reconciling Personal Charity and Structural Justice.
Anche questo, un'altra opposizione polare. Come vedete, è fondamentale abituarci a pensare in questo modo, altrimenti non veniamo fuori da tanti dei problemi quotidiani che abbiamo.
It's fundamental to find a way to reconcile charity and justice, otherwise there's no way out of the kinds of problems that we have.
Certo, questo non è che risolve tutto,
It's not that this resolves everything,
però avere dei quadri mentali diversi
but to have these different categories that help us
è già l'inizio
is already the beginning of the solutions
per stabilire dei rapporti diversi,
in order to establish different kinds of relationships,
perché la realtà è piena di contrasti,
because the reality is full of contrasts
è piena di polarità.
and it's full of these polarities.
Allora, una di due: o noi polarizziamo le polarità,
Either we polarize the polarities,
e allora l'unico modo di farlo è eliminando una parte,
is to eliminate the idea of eliminating one side,
oppure rafforziamo le polarità.
or we strengthen them.
È quello che alcuni chiamano il dono della differenza.
So to discover the gift of difference
Senza quello che pensa diverso da me,
without the other who thinks differently than I
io
do,
non posso essere me stesso.
I cannot be myself.
Allora, io sempre dico, qual è il modo di risolvere la polarizzazione?
What is the way to resolve polarization?
Non è non parlandone,
It's not squishing the conversation,
ma approfondendo la polarità.
but going into depth into what are the polarities, what are the differences.
Questo non è che è facile.
It's not easy,
A me non mi risulta sempre.
and I don't always do a good job with it.
A me se mi dicono, guarda che gli americani sono polarizzati tra repubblicani e democratici,
So they say, for example, the Americans are polarized between Republicans and Democrats.
io con una certa freddezza dico, ma è semplice.
And with a certain kind of oversimplification, I say, well, it's easy.
Non capisco perché sono così polarizzati.
I don't understand why they're so polarized.
Però se a me mi dicono
But if they say,
che gli spagnoli sono polarizzati tra catalani e castigliani,
but if the Spanish are polarized through the Catalan and the Basques,
io dico, comincia a venirmi il sangue comincia a bollire.
my blood starts to boil.
Allora io che mi credevo libero di polarizzazione,
And so I, who thought I was free of all these polarizations,
scopro che non è vero.
I discover it's not true.
Allora che devo fare una strada
We need
anch'io.
to travel a path.
E così con tutte le cose.
And so with everything that we're struggling with.
Allora, le grida dei poveri e le
The
grida
cries of the poor and the cries of the earth also urgently call for reflection on a large-scale project to address the structures of systemic injustice. In a true reconciliation of opposites, a grounding in an appreciation of el pueblo fiel, and work to overcome the zero-sum game of frameworks for personal commitment and action in no way devalue thoughtful and critical engagement with the powerful ideas at the heart of economic, financial, legal, and policy systems.
Il lavoro personale non annulla l'impegno strutturale.
So the personal work that we do doesn't annul also the work that we need to do on a level of systems.
In effetti, una
In
discussione
effect,
che
a
si limita
discussion
agli
that limits
incentivi
itself to
personali,
personal incentives and individual action would still beg the important question of at which level to address economic and social inequality. Do the deepest solutions emerge through an emphasis on freely chosen personal commitments to economic justice, or through adjustments to regulatory schemes that mandate structural change and redistribution of economic costs and benefits? Here, too, the answer, of course, is both. Both.
Quindi mantenere la polarità.
So we need to maintain these tensions.
Nel suo
But
discorso
in his February 2017 discourse, Pope Francis also warned the Good Samaritan is not enough, particularly,
non è sufficiente.
not enough,
In particolare,
particularly when engaging interdisciplinary projects at the nexus between theological reflection and business models, the Pope encouraged EOC participants to pay close attention to the deeper and more structural questions that may permeate the incidents and contexts that lead to accidents, violence, or other forms of injury. The problem with a myopic focus on individual action is that it may obfuscate the occasions when the root of our most difficult problems should also be attributed to structures and systems that foster injustice.
lavorare sulle strutture, lavorare a livello personale.
So both the work on the structures and the personal commitment.
Dobbiamo anche prestare molta attenzione a come il nostro lavoro è incorporato.
Further, we also need to pay close attention to how our work is embedded in social and legal systems that tend to produce marginalized and discarded people. And Pope Francis explains this. He says, capitalism continues to produce discarded people in whom we would then like to care for. The principal ethical dilemma of this capitalism is the creation of discarded people, then trying to hide them or make sure they are no longer seen. A serious form of poverty in a civilization is when it is no longer able to see its poor who are at first discarded and then hidden.
Sull'economia profetica mira a connettere e mettere in rete le persone e le comunità di tutto il mondo che credono appassionatamente nello sviluppo umano e nella sostenibilità.
What kinds of frameworks or better paradigms would change the rules of the game so that socioeconomic systems no longer produce discarded people? What collectives might help to remedy the problem of no longer being able to even see the poor?
L'ostacolo formidabile alla più ampia accoglienza della sfida lanciata da Papa Francesco per sviluppare nuovi modelli economici risiede nei livelli attualmente intensi di polarizzazione sociale.
Recognizing the enormity of challenges posed by structural injustice and outdated aid policies, the prophetic economy claims to connect and network the people and communities around the world who believe passionately in human development and sustainability and who are working tirelessly to change the rules and demand justice.
Io credo di sì.
I think so.
Credo di sì perché c'è questa antropologia sotto di cui abbiamo parlato.
I think it can be helpful because there is this anthropology, this vision of the human person that is underneath all of the work.
Non perché l'economia di comunione abbia dei imprenditori bravissimi o
It's
gente di buona volontà.
It's not because we have business people who are who knows what kind of skill or level, or not so much because of that.
Da quanto ho capito, di questi incontri annuali, in genere questo è uno spazio privilegiato per i repubblicani e i democratici di riunirsi.
Might the Economy of Community Project offer any insight into this challenge or solace regarding steps toward healing? From what I understand about these annual meetings, generally this has been a space for Republicans and Democrats to come together. It is through concrete projects, through the incarnation, that we can receive the invitation to be protagonists and also to appreciate the precious contribution of others, even in the midst of contrasting ideas and conflicts. Pope Francis invites us to move into spaces fraught with tension and conflict in order to discover together the new paradigms and paths that could lead to greater injustice and sustainable future for our planet. As the Pope himself noted, economy of communion are two worlds that contemporary culture keeps separate and often considers opposite. The economy of communion's efforts to unite these realms over the course of more than 25 years now offer to the Church and civil society a locus for deeper reflection on the path forward. And while the project may demand, in the words of Pope Francis, great generosity on our part, its greatest strength is in the realization that it is not a heroic individual undertaking. Communion, itself a sign of the unity of opposites, is also the life-giving protagonist and source of insight and strength for the journey ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. And to respond to Jesus's reflection, we have with us today Charlie Camosi, who is an associate professor of theology at Fordham University. And Charlie gave me the first chapter of this book last week, and I could not stop reading it. So I just want to point out to everyone, Resisting Throwaway Culture, Charlie's book will be available outside as well. And I think we're able to arrange for book signings if that's of interest. Charlie's work on ethics and policy moves us beyond a lot of the arguments that tend to pit us against one another. Instead, he does a tremendous job of finding common ground to help us unpack the real complexities of some of today's most debated issues. So we're really happy to have you with us today.
I really couldn't be happier to be back with the Focolare. I had breakfast with my friend Dana Dillon this morning. She told a story about going to Luminosa in Hyde Park for the first time and being told that she was home. And it's good to be home here with the Focolare. Though also, I will say, with a little dig at Dana actually, as a Wisconsin boy, I'm not quite ready to think of Texas as home, but which should go without saying. But I also couldn't be happier to be giving a response at a conference like this, because rather than having to craft something myself, I get to be poked and prodded by the thoughts of our main presenter. What could be better than that? Plus, if things go poorly, I can always blame it on him, right? Well, I'm sorry. What could I possibly do with this? But I'm happy to report, and we just all saw it's definitely not that kind of situation today. The bottom line, I really love giving responses. I'm so thankful to Amy and the Focolare for inviting me here to sit by the hearth with you this weekend. Though I must admit, I was a little bit intimidated this morning when I was looking over the Word document with my remarks on it, and it said response to Jesus at the top. So pray for me if you would. I want to pick up on two themes from Jesus's paper. The first is the unity of opposites, and second, the obstacles that intense levels of polarization. So there's great value in thinking about the unity of opposites. I try to do this in my own work and my own activism in several ways. The thesis, antithesis, synthesis methodology is something I drill into my students nonstop. But, and I say this because it's a danger to me as well, there's a danger here too, namely that adopting this mindset can sometimes cause us to accept things as opposites too quickly, things that aren't in fact opposites. I'm generally not a fan of postmodern deconstructionist philosophy and the offshoots it has produced, which dominate so many aspects of at least the academy that I am in today. But one great gift of this tradition is its skepticism of oppositional binaries and binary thinking more generally. Far too often, this kind of thinking accepts a view of reality which is artificially limiting and causes us to miss very important realities, often quite beautiful realities. If all you can see is day and night, then you will miss out on dusk and the dawn. If all you can see is male and female, then you will miss out on the beauty of our fellow intersex human beings. In a sad and shameless attempt to play to a Texas crowd, I was going to say, if all you can see is ketchup and mustard, then you'll miss out on the beauty of salsa and hot sauce. But I decided that was silly and decided to cut that out. Oftentimes, the problem with binary thinking is not only that it causes you to miss out on these beautiful realities, but it misunderstands the very dimensions of the structures being described. Day and night, male and female are on a two-dimensional continuum, but what about, say, the religious-secular binary? We use it all the time, but I've been convinced over the last few years by William Kavanaugh and others that especially given the predominance in this culture of a secular civil religion, we just saw it play out yesterday in this country as the articles of impeachment were paraded over in a liturgical ceremony over to the Senate. The religious-secular distinction fundamentally misunderstands how ultimate or transcendental values function in a culture. Religious claims about the good and secular claims about the good are not opposites at all. And furthermore, because the religious-secular binary is oppositional, it creates a tool to marginalize others with whom I disagree. Don't like something Catholics or Muslims are doing? Call it religious, as opposed to secular, and then you get to kick it out. Don't like something your fellow Catholics or Muslims are doing? Dismiss it as secular, and then you get to kick it out. I want to mention two other oppositional binaries, though, that will help me bridge to the second point of response, the intense levels of polarization, which I've tried to make my career about bridging. It is difficult to imagine a better example of this kind of polarization, at least in the United States, than when we think about the debate over abortion. Nearly half a century in the making, it is rightly described as our second civil war, cold civil war, but a civil war nonetheless. If we imagine our discourse over abortion as this kind of us versus them antagonistic binary, pro-life versus pro-choice, we totally misunderstand the deep complexity of the issue itself and the deep complexity of what people believe about the issue. When given the option in polls, for instance, large majorities say they are both pro-choice and pro-life. Gallup has been asking people, US Americans, their views about abortion by trimester for some time now. Before week 12, 6 in 10 are pro-choice. After week 12, 7 in 10 are pro-life. Is this a pro-life or pro-choice electorate? Given the complex and multi-layered views of people, the question itself doesn't make sense. It assumes a false antagonistic binary. And it's a false antagonistic binary that has fueled a second cold civil war. Finally, let us talk about right-left polarization in US politics, which I think is behind a lot of what folks mean when they talk about polarization. Again, the oppositional binary is awful on multiple levels. In the last general election, most people defined themselves by opposition to the other, not in communion with each other, obviously. And more people are, in fact, voting this way. In fact, for those of you that aren't US Americans, you hear people voted for Donald Trump. What you should hear, at least for a majority of them, is that they were actually voting against his opponent, not that they were voting for Trump, and vice versa. As terrible as this sounds, I want to spend the rest of my time talking about, or most of the rest of my time talking about, two very significant pieces of good news to report here as well, and they get right to the heart of the concern to overcome obstacles of intense polarization. The first is that US Americans, when given the structural opportunities to do so, don't see themselves in a polarized culture war between Democrats and Republicans. Just 10 years ago, 34% of US Americans identified as independents. You know what that number is today? 44%. The highest percentage in the 75 years that Pew has been tracking that number. By contrast, Pew found that only 27% identify as Democrats and 26% as Republicans. Furthermore, a major 2018 study of political affiliation in the United States titled Hidden Tribes found something similar. As the New York Times put it, the study found most people, quote, do not see their lives through a political lens, and when they have political views, the views are far less rigid than those of the highly politically engaged, ideologically orthodox tribes, end quote. Indeed, 2/3 of US Americans belong to what the study described as a, quote, exhausted majority. Who's part of the exhausted? Their members, quote, share a sense of fatigue with our polarized national conversation, a willingness to be flexible in their political viewpoints, and a lack of voice in the national conversation. That's 2/3, 2 out of every 3. Members of the media, politicians, and fundraisers, on the other hand, benefit from seeing US political culture as a polarized disaster between Republicans and Democrats, and they can and do use it to advance their personal agendas and make lots and lots and lots of money. This is one reason why Congress, not the US American people, is more polarized now than at any time since Civil War Reconstruction. When you hear about polarization, I think this is a fundamental distinction to make between what Congress is and the structural reasons for that and what actual people are. I think there are some people. The one major piece of good news is that the polarized narrative doesn't describe where the country is at all as a group. And while the polarization that I just mentioned in our structures does pose a challenge for marketing and implementing something like the economy of communion through traditional media, politics, and fundraisers, again, the US Americans themselves on the ground in their communities are very open to these kinds of creative ideas. The second major piece of good news is that we are starting to realize this on the ground, and we are in the beginnings of a political realignment as a result in the United States. Whatever one thinks of Donald Trump, I happen to not be a fan, his election signaled that this realignment is already well underway. It just isn't even clear what a Democrat or Republican is anymore. I like the way the Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson put it recently. He said, quote, my view is that the traditional left to right, progressive to conservative, Democrat to Republican political axis that we're all so familiar with is no longer a valid schematic of American political opinion. And I believe neither party has the foggiest idea of what the new diagram looks like. Quote. In my book, Resisting Throwaway Culture, I took this as such a hopeful place for us to be. Maybe even a time to be quiet, to pray, to disconnect from institutions and frameworks that keep us coming back to the old antagonistic binaries and institutions which prop them up. We have, I would argue, the possibility of creating a cultural and intellectual and political space for something like the economy of communion to actually be heard. Folks, again, are looking for something new, looking for alternatives to what's making them so tired and antagonistic toward each other. Exhausted, if you will. And though academics are often, I know this as an academic myself, are often really good at offering pie in the sky proposals that have no application to reality, I think we can point to real life examples of this actually starting to happen in really exciting ways. For many years, the right, again, whatever that means now, was focused on a kind of libertarian, hands-off approach to the economy. But there are more and more conservatives, self-identified conservatives anyway, who understand that government has an essential role to play if we are to put the economy at the service of the human being, and especially the human being in a family. Here, you could offer many examples, but here's a classic one. During the recent debate in this country over tax reform, libertarian-leaning folks said they wanted to stop government from, quote, picking winners and losers. So probably a phrase, if you pay attention to politics, you've heard quite often. But a large conservative constituency balked at this and instead pushed hard for things like child tax credits, adoption tax credits, which I've taken advantage of in my family quite a bit, not penalizing marriage, and more. In addition, there is new support from, again, the right for things like paid family leave, help with children and adults that need care in the home, and other programs which serve the dignity of the human person, especially, again, in the family. Here I'm thinking of people like Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, Rusty Reno, Sohrab Ahmari, and many, many more. In fact, depending on how you want to think about it, there could be tens of millions who fit into this. When I was thinking about how to say it, I didn't know quite how to say it, so I said this space for which we don't have a space. It's this really, there's a large group of people who have these kinds of views, but there's nowhere for them to land. There's no space for them in our current discourse anyway. So let me just go with this for a second. If instead of dividing people into left and right along a two-dimensional line, and we interject just a very little of tame complexity by allowing folks to also locate themselves as left or right on economic issues and social issues together, and you can imagine like a quadrant, like an upper left, upper right, lower left, social issues, economic issues, X, Y axes. There's this group in the upper left who are socially conservative and economically liberal, tens of millions of them, and they have no home, they have no constituency, they have no place. And the number of those people is growing. We are familiar with people who are actually socially liberal and economically conservative. They're in the, for me, lower right quadrant, lower left, I guess if I'm holding this out over here. And that gets a lot of play, at least in US media, but it's a very tiny group compared to the, what I call the ALCs, upper left quadrant people. By the way, I'm searching for new names. ALC just doesn't have much of a ring to it. But again, there's a number of people in this creative space for which we don't have a space. There'd be millions and millions more if we had a space for them, and I consider this to be a very hopeful thing. The situation in the United States is a hopeful one for reception of new ideas that seemed unthinkable even 5 or 10 years ago. And this is very good news for those of us who would like to see something like the economy of communion get a hearing and take off. Let me conclude by focusing on a different challenge, though, a stiff challenge, but like the one I just outlined, a challenge that I believe also offers us the hope for being a hearth for the human family. In part because we've seen the collapse of so many frameworks and institutions that grounded us in the past, a majority of US Americans are adrift, largely disconnected, largely unhappy, many even despairing. In particular, many of us find ourselves addicted to the literal toxicity of our glowing rectangles. In an attempt to find a real connection through interactions that more and more actually push us away from anything like authentic communion, has predictable results. In what they describe as a race to the bottom of the brainstem, technology and social media companies are working with the best biologists and social scientists to keep us scrolling and tapping our phones and other devices as much as and as long as possible. And they're quite successful. Studies on those of us who are regular users who try to put down our phones show that our bodies release cortisol, the same stress hormone that was released when early Homo sapiens was confronted with a predator in the wild. Normally, small amounts of cortisol released from time to time is no big deal, but its chronic release is so toxic to the human body that experts refer to it as public health enemy number 1. This kind of consumption has mediated our relationships too in ways that have made us less connected to real people and as a result far more lonely. Social media isn't the only thing that is making us lonely, however. Our consumer lifestyles are geared towards a kind of unrootedness without the relationships that come from thick communities. For many caught in a consumer culture, the goal in this country is to be independent, right, in a large house, most often requiring the income of 2 workers, not relying on others, or at least not pretending you don't rely on others. If that means hopping from job to job, city to city, then that's what it means. Even if we could afford the children necessary to rebuild our relationships, perhaps through extended family, many of us wouldn't be around long enough for that to take root. This has had predictable effects on our mental and physical well-being and health. Our children are now facing mental health problems, especially depression and anxiety, at rates unlike anything we've ever seen. Loneliness in the US population overall has now caused, again, a public health crisis, a crisis that is, again, public health enemy number 1. One reason is certainly the deep correlation between loneliness and our dramatically increased rate of drug abuse. The stakes involved in answering these questions and problems couldn't be higher. Deaths due to drug overdose and suicide are way, way up. So dramatically, in fact, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, US life expectancy has gone down for 3 straight years in a row. First time since World War I that has happened. And I just saw the movie 1917 recently, and there's different things going on with World War I and life expectancy. People mean different things when they talk about Jesus forsaken, but I would say we are living out Jesus forsaken at the moment. And this obviously presents a challenge, but like all periods of Jesus forsaken, it also presents a profound opportunity, especially for an approach to economics focused on genuine communion between people through authentic, embodied integration of their communities, right? And grounded in a spiritual reality about the dignity of all with a special focus on the least among us. And this is the kind of thing, to my way of thinking, that the Focolare does better than anybody else, especially when it comes to doing it across the kinds of differences we have in this country. So while US American culture is facing deep, deep challenges at the moment, and I don't want to minimize those in any way, they are precisely the kind of challenges which create a profound opening for something like the economy of communion in particular, and the spirituality of unity more broadly to take root. Thank you.
Testing, testing, okay.
We wanted to offer Jesus an opportunity to respond to Charlie, if it makes sense.
Sì. Intanto volevo ringraziare vivamente il professor Charles Camosi.
First, I wanted to thank very warmly Professor Charlie Camosi. Testing. Yeah, okay,
Ecco.
great.
Per la sua profonda, sì, profonda esposizione, no?
For his very profound discussion.
E vorrei prendere un primo punto.
And I wanted to take a first point.
C'è qualcosa che ha detto subito all'inizio,
That
no?
what he said right away at the beginning.
Effettivamente lui ha criticato giustamente
So he very rightly critiqued
la possibilità di interpretare la opposizione polare
the problem of the interpretive key of polar opposites
in termini di una logica binaria.
in a binary key of interpretation.
È possibile farlo così.
Yes, it is possible to do this.
Non è proprio l'intento né di Guardini né di Papa Francesco né mio.
But that's not the intent of Guardini or Pope Francis, or also it's not my intent.
Nel senso che l'opposizione polare è giusta, va interpretata, o detto l'ermeneutica giusta,
The
proprio in una logica trinaria.
The right hermeneutic would be in a logic that is
Trinaria,
triune,
non binaria.
not
trinaria.
not binary, but a three-way dynamic.
Infatti io non ho parlato di unione degli opposti,
So I did not speak of a unity of opposites,
ma di unità degli opposti,
but unity in opposites,
perché il concetto di unione è binario
because the concept of union is binary,
e già qualcosa di buono.
and there's something good in that also.
Due cose si uniscono.
The two things come together.
Per esempio, non so, due organizzazioni si uniscono
Two organizations come together, for
per
example,
fare
to
qualcosa,
do something,
però ognuna rimane se stessa
but each one remains itself,
e percepisce una certa quota di interessi
and it perceives its own interests that are coming out as well
nel lavoro svolto.
in the work that they do together.
L'unità degli opposti non è questo.
Unity in opposites is not this.
Non è unione, non è giustaposizione,
It's not a union or it's not a juxtaposition.
è unità.
It's unity,
Il che vuol dire che c'è sempre un elemento terzo
which means there's always a third element that comes into the picture,
che proviene proprio dalla comunione tra gli opposti,
which comes from the communion among opposites,
che non rimangono se stessi,
that they don't remain themselves,
ma che cambiano continuamente.
but invites continuous change.
Per quello è che l'unità, a differenza dell'unione, è feconda.
So for this reason, unity is fertile, is fecund.
Non che l'unione non lo sia,
Not that union is not
però
also
non
fertile,
al livello dell'unità.
but not at the same level as unity.
Forse voi avete in mente tante cose,
You can think of many examples,
anche sul piano morale,
also on a moral plane.
perché usiamo gli stessi contatti, no?
We use the same kinds of
Per
concepts.
esempio si parla di unioni omosessuali,
So to think of a homosexual union,
non di unità omosessuale.
not a unity.
Qui le parole hanno,
The words are difficult
le
to,
parole hanno un peso,
they have a weight.
quindi non che non siano, non è che l'unione sia negativa,
It's not that the union is negative,
non è che non produca niente,
and it's not that it doesn't produce anything,
però non ha l'intensità
but it's a
creativa
different
dell'unità.
intensity of it's a different intensity.
Allora, come dico, c'è sempre un elemento terzo
So there's a third element,
e mentre nelle unioni il rapporto è normalmente dettato da norme piuttosto fisse,
when you think of a union, it comes through norms that are fixed
per esempio di organizzazioni che si uniscono per uno scopo,
to unite for a particular task.
si danno delle norme molto precise,
There are very precise norms.
per cui devono guadagnare questo e questo,
So it's like almost like a
non
contractual
possono sorpassare certi limiti.
and not going beyond certain limits.
Nell'unità questo non esiste.
In unity, it's a different thing.
Nell'unità tutto è dinamico,
There's a different kind of dynamic that
c'è
comes in.
una condivisione totale,
There's a total sharing.
per cui, come dico, uno dei poli è ricreato dall'altro
So one of the poles is recreated by the other,
e non è mai lo stesso,
and it's never the same.
e quindi non è previsibile cosa sarà.
So, and it's not, you can't foresee what it will bring about.
E in questo senso che, come diceva molto bene il professor Charles,
So as Charlie was saying before, as he said very well,
effettivamente con un concetto binario non potremmo godere delle sfumature delle polarità.
A binary way of thinking cannot capture the complexity of this kind of thought.
Rimaniamo nella notte e nel giorno,
We just all we see is night and day,
però non nel tramonto.
but not the sunset or the sunrise.
Perché vediamo il tramonto?
How can we see the sunset or the sunrise?
Perché è frutto dell'unità tra la notte e il giorno.
It's the fruit of the unity between night and day.
È come dire che l'unità è quella che produce le sfumature.
Unity is what helps us to see the nuances.
È proprio l'unità che garantisce le sfumature.
It's unity that guarantees the nuance.
E questo è una cosa meravigliosa. No?
And this is something really beautiful, really wonderful.
Cioè vedere così la realtà
So to see reality
ti permette di godere sempre del nuovo.
helps you to also appreciate the novelty, what is new.
Quando uno va, per esempio, come dicevo prima, lo dico perché l'ho fatto recentemente, nei paesi dell'est
When you go, for example, to
europeo
Eastern Europe,
e comunisti,
to the ex-communist countries,
tu subito distingui
you see right away
gli edifici, le costruzioni
the buildings
del tempo del comunismo,
from the time of communism.
perché sono tutti uguali.
They are all the same.
E quindi, infatti, quello è frutto dell'unione delle repubbliche socialiste sovietiche.
And that's a fruit of the union of the Soviet Republic.
Lì non c'è stata unità,
There was not unity.
c'è stata unione.
There was a union.
E allora l'unione più o meno crolla.
Union sooner or later crumbles.
Più tardi che prima.
Sooner or later.
Sì. L'unità è più forte.
Unity is stronger.
Può essere più debole, più fragile.
It could be also fragile
Negli inizi, no?
at the beginning,
Però effettivamente
but
è più forte.
effectively.
Per questa... Adesso noi possiamo continuare a usare le parole, perché qui parliamo degli Stati Uniti dell'America.
we can go on with also the discussion of the terms because we're talking
Allora,
about the
potresti dire-
United States of America.
Lei sta parlando contro di noi,
That who is speaking against us.
no? E possiamo usare le parole come vogliamo.
We can use the words,
L'importante è la realtà.
but what is important is the reality.
Ecco, è sempre, comunque l'unità è sempre una conquista.
So, but unity is always a
Come dico,
conquest.
neanche qui io contrappongo.
So I wouldn't contradict here, but
Non contrappongo unità a unione.
so it's not that unity and
Dico
union are
semplicemente
in contradiction,
che dall'unione all'unità c'è un salto
but there's a leap in
di
quality.
una logica binaria a una logica trinaria.
It's a
No?
different kind of logic that brings in this third
È
element,
un salto qualitativo.
and it's a qualitative leap.
Adesso voi potreste dire, beh, abbiamo conseguito tanto con l'unione,
And you could say, well, we've gone quite a bit of path ahead with the
ma
concept of union,
abbiamo raggiunto l'unità?
but have we reached unity?
Questa è anche una buona sfida,
This is really a challenge
penso, no? Pensarla,
to think of it
pensare così, no? E questo succede anche a livello culturale,
on a cultural level,
a tanti livelli, no?
and many levels.
Just 10, 20 seconds. Uh, so when there's a legitimate, like understood, very clear polarity, that makes 100% sense to me, and it's very inspiring, and boy, oh boy, that's great. But what I was trying to say in my remarks, and maybe I just wasn't clear enough, is, and I'm indicting myself here as well, because I'm so focused on trying to bridge those polarities and bring a Trinitarian approach, I can accept things as binary polarities that aren't in fact binary polarities. So people talk about Democrats and Republicans in this country, not just outside of it, as if that's a polarized binary. But except in Congress, it's not. It just isn't. That's what the numbers from Pew told us. So it's going to be a different kind of or at least I'm not an expert in the theories of dialogue, but I imagine it would be a different kind of dialogue that involves multipolar approach that would involve more than two poles, I guess, and therefore would be slightly different.
So in the few minutes we have remaining, I think I would just ask if the two of you might like to leave us with a bit more of a practical reflection, if that's not too much to ask of our academics. So I was really struck by the gift of our differences, and most of us try to avoid our differences. We just came off the holidays. I sat down with my family for the holidays and they said, remember, no politics talk. And so I think there's something to that. How do we actually embrace this idea that our differences are a gift for one another? And how does that in turn help create new spaces, or Charlie, as you were saying, new diagrams, new configurations that we can live into? So I think in closing, I would just ask, what might you leave us with as to how we can start to live into that new reality? What sort of insights or wisdom have you picked up along the way through your deep reflection?
Just two quick stories from my own experience about this. One is just growing up in the household I did. My mother was a March on Washington, die-in-the-wool liberal, and my father was running the family business as a die-in-the-wool conservative. And they fought over politics all day long at the dinner tables and during holidays, and that produced me. And and of course, they're partially right, and I turned out to be right. So that was productive. More seriously, though, probably the most influential, other than probably St. John Paul II, the most influential intellectual force in my life is an atheist, anti-Christian philosopher named Peter Singer. And I wrote a book on his work as my second book, and I think he's wrong about 70% of what he says, but I used to think he was wrong about 100% and that he was pure evil. And having a dialogue with him across difference has totally changed the way I think about many, many different kinds of things. And I won't get into details about that, but those are two pieces from my own experience, anyway.
Non sono un tipo pratico.
I'm not, I'm not a practical guy. Non è vero.
Questa è la critica che sempre mi hanno fatto quelli con cui ho sempre vissuto.
These are the ideas with which I've always been living. I'm sorry. Ripetere.
Sì, questa è la critica che sempre mi hanno fatto tutti quelli con cui ho vissuto, che non ero un tipo pratico.
This is the critique. Sorry, I apologize. This is the critique that those that I have lived with have had of me, that I'm not a practical guy.
Infatti,
Sorry, apologies.
alcuni con cui ho vissuto non mi lasciavano nemmeno guidare la macchina.
So some of the people I've lived with have not even let me drive the car.
Infatti, quando lo guidavo comunque,
But when I would drive anyways,
ci avvicinavamo a un semaforo
we would come close to a stoplight.
e dicevano: guarda com'è rosso il rosso di quel semaforo.
Look at how it's red. Look how red it is.
Perché avevano paura che io non l'avessi visto.
Because
Allora,
they would worry that I wasn't noticing that it was red.
siccome io mi arrabbiavo e dicevo: ma certo ho visto il semaforo.
And I would get mad and I said, of course
Allora,
I saw the light.
non mi dicevano più attento al semaforo,
And so they wouldn't say anymore, be
ma
careful of the
dicevano:
light.
Ma quel rosso del semaforo mai è stato così rosso.
The red of the signal has never been so red as it is now.
Per non farmi sentire male, no?
So to not make me feel bad that they were trying to help me pay attention to the stoplight.
Comunque, ehm, sì, io penso un consiglio è
Piece of advice that I would have
partire sempre dalla realtà,
is to start always from the reality that's in front of us,
non dalle idee,
not from the ideas.
perché questo che dice Papa Francesco, la realtà è superiore all'idea, no?
The reality is superior to the ideas.
Quando rimaniamo fedeli alla realtà,
When we are faithful to the reality,
è difficile non trovare un minimo di accordo.
it's difficult to, it's much more likely that we're able to find at least some area of agreement.
Per esempio, anche parlavamo a pranzo sul tema dei migranti.
For example, at lunch, we were speaking about the theme of migration.
Allora, noi su quel tema possiamo discutere infinitamente
We can discuss it infinitely
se partiamo dall'idea.
if we start from the ideas.
Per esempio, un'idea di tipo economico,
An economic idea
un'idea di tipo culturale,
or a cultural.
ma partiamo dalla realtà,
But let's start from the reality,
che lì davanti abbiamo una persona
which is we have in front of us a
o
person.
migliaia di
We
persone
have millions of people,
e che dobbiamo fare qualcosa.
and we need to do something.
Allora, prima partiamo da lì,
So to start from there,
la dignità della persona.
the dignity of the person,
Quella è la cosa reale.
that's the real dimension.
Allora, probabilmente tutti ci saremmo d'accordo su qualche cosa
We would all be in agreement on at least something of that.
e faremo almeno qualcosa in comune
And we would have the opportunity to do something together
per quella persona.
for that person.
Dopo possiamo discutere sul sistema economico,
And then we can talk about the economic
sulla
system,
dimensione finanziaria del
the
problema
financing,
o culturale.
the cultural dimensions.
Però se partiamo dall'ideologia,
But if we start from the ideological framework,
che non è reale,
which is not the real,
per esempio dire quello lì è un latino.
we could say that person is a Latino.
Questo è già una categoria che abbiamo messo, no?
It's already a category that we've put.
Non è reale.
That's not the real.
Voi direte, ma come non è reale? È realissimo, è
They say, oh,
latino.
no, that's real. I mean, he is, of course, he's a Latino.
Ma quello appartiene al linguaggio,
But it's part of the language that we use,
appartiene alla verità logica.
the logical truth
Per esempio che un latino non è un bianco.
that a Latino is not a Anglo-Saxon white person.
Sì, questa è la dimensione del logos, no?
This is the dimension of the word that we use, the
Logos,
logos.
no? Cioè, latino non è anglosassone.
The Latino is not an
Ma
Anglo-Saxon.
questo non è il primo livello della verità,
But that's not the grounding of
è
truth.
già un secondo livello.
That's a second level of reflection.
Nel secondo livello cominciano le discussioni,
And that's where the discussions start.
perché per esempio, quanti tipi di latine ci sono?
How many types of Latin people are there?
Allora io potrei dire, tu dici che quello è latino, ma che tipo di latino?
You say he's Latin, but what type of Latin?
Ma latino ispanico?
Hispanic Latin.
Ma no, latino iberico?
One
O
from
non so,
Spain.
latino... Allora cominciano le discussioni e non finiamo più.
And then we start these kinds of discussions and we never end.
Mentre se partiamo del livello più proprio della realtà,
But if we go to a level of reality that's more fundamental,
quell'altro è una persona.
that is a person.
Sono di fronte a una persona.
I am in front of a person.
Quindi non c'entra anglosassone, latino, infatti di fronte a una persona tu non hai delle categorizzazioni
In front of a
immediate.
person, you resist putting everything into categories.
Allora, questo è partire dalla realtà.
And so this is what it means to have as a point of departure from the reality.
Immaginate se dopo partiamo ancora più in là, no? Per esempio di dire quello lì è un repubblicano.
So then we could take this further and say that person there is a Republican.
è un livello ancora diverso
It's
del dire
a still different level
che è latino.
from the ethnic identity.
Allora, quindi tutti questi livelli sono sempre meno forti
But these are always weaker dimensions
del livello della verità reale.
than the real truth of the human person in front of us.
Cioè, è più forte dal punto di vista della verità che l'altro è persona
It's stronger, the reality that that the person in front of me is a human
che
being
non che è latino,
than a part of an ethnic group Latino,
che non che è repubblicano.
than part of a political party Republican.
Il terzo livello è così debole che potrebbe non esserlo domani.
The third level is so weak that it might not even exist tomorrow.
Il secondo è già più complesso.
The second level of ethnic identity is more complicated.
Però anche oggi a pranzo si diceva che la considerazione dei latini è cambiata molto.
But today we were saying also even the consideration of ethnic groups like the Latins, the Latinos changed a lot.
Ma il primo livello rimane sempre
But
quello.
that first level of the identity of the human person remains.
E su quello possiamo essere tutti d'accordo.
And we can really be in agreement on that and take that as our point of departure.
Tanto che abbiamo fatto delle dichiarazioni universali sui diritti della persona.
And for this reason, we were able to make some universal declarations of the human rights of the person.
Adesso, non so se questo è pratico,
I don't know if this was practical,
però a me serve molto,
but it helps me a lot
e serve molto per altre questioni,
for many other questions,
per i rapporti con
for our
l'altro.
relationships with each other.
Io veramente se riesco a ragionare così,
If I'm able to reason like this,
non ho mai trovato un ostacolo per avere un rapporto con nessuno.
I never found an obstacle to be able to enter into a relationship with anyone when I start from that foundational
E quindi
point.
con tutti posso fare un pezzo di strada,
So with everyone, I can travel a piece of the journey,
almeno un pezzo di strada,
at
un
least
metro,
a little piece of the journey, maybe just a meter,
con qualcuno di più,
and with others maybe more,
qualcuno tutta la vita, no?
and with others my whole life.
Ecco.
So again, a big thank you to Jesus and Charlie. You took on some of the most challenging topics of our time with a lot of grace and insight. So thank you for that. And that concludes this session. We are back to the next session at, is it 4 o'clock or 3:45?
Oh, 4 o'clock, okay. No. So 4 o'clock, and we are again parallel workshops, but they're really, I think, almost the same in the sense it's an opportunity for discussion and engagement. And so when you come in, we might need a little bit of help to move some of the chairs around. And we will then divide accordingly into areas of discussion that you're interested in. So enjoy the break, and we'll see we'll be in the different rooms at 4 o'clock.